Have you ever loved someone so deeply, yet never found the right words to say it? Elliot Hawthorne, a self-made millionaire with an empire built on silence and strategy. Claire Monroe, his fiercely loyal assistant, carrying the weight of her family while quietly becoming the backbone of his world. For 3 years, they stood side by side, bound by unspoken trust and unsaid truths. But what happens when trust begins to crack? Not from betrayal, but from all the things left unspoken. Imagine this: you've given your everything to someone's success, only to realize they never truly saw you. Or worse, they saw you too clearly and still said nothing. Would you walk away, or would you wait, hoping they'd finally turn around? This is a story of power and pride, of quiet love and silent choices. A tale where one wrong assumption, one hidden act of care, sets off a chain of events that could destroy everything or bring healing neither expected. If you've ever wished someone had just said what you needed to hear, this story is for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Let's begin The Arrogant Millionaire. And the truth he never dared to speak. The ballroom shimmered with soft golden light, like candle flames reflected on still water. Waiters in crisp black jackets moved with quiet efficiency between white linen tables, balancing silver trays of flutes and hors d'oeuvres. Above it all, a jazz quartet played something smooth and slow background music for polite laughter and practiced smiles. Elliot Hawthorne stood near the edge of the room, a glass of neat bourbon in his hand, untouched. He wasn't much for parties, even when they bore his name, especially not tonight. The gala was for the Hawthorne Foundation, a charity he'd started a decade ago, mostly out of guilt and a vague sense of obligation. Each year, it raised more money. Each year, it felt more hollow. He scanned the room with the same keen gaze he used in boardrooms. He saw partnerships forming, egos flaring, a few early signs of hangovers waiting to happen. But his eyes kept returning to one spot. Claire Monroe was dancing. Not just dancing laughing, and not just laughing with someone else. The man twirling her gently across the floor wore a tailored navy suit and a charming grin that Elliot already disliked. His name was Noah Green, and Elliot didn't need an introduction to know he hated him. Claire looked radiant. There was no other word for it. Her long auburn hair was pinned up in soft waves, a few loose strands framing her face. Her dark green dress hugged her in all the right places without being flashy, elegant, unassuming, exactly like her. Elliot hadn't realized she danced. In the 3 years she'd worked as his assistant, no, his right hand, his compass, he'd seen her solve international logistics in 6 hours, talk down a hostile investor in 5 languages, and organize his entire world without ever raising her voice. But this Claire was different, alive in a way he had never let himself imagine. "Beautiful evening," said a voice beside him. Elliot didn't turn. He knew it was Richard Albright, one of the foundation's oldest donors. "It is," he replied, still watching her. "Is that your assistant out there?" Richard asked with a chuckle. Didn't know she had that in her. Elliot sipped his drink, not trusting himself to answer. The song ended, and Claire curtsied slightly before laughing at something Noah whispered. Elliot clenched his jaw as Noah leaned in too close, far too familiar for someone who had just returned to Boston last month. Claire caught his gaze. Just for a second. Her smile faltered, then softened, then returned full force as she walked toward him. Enjoying the show, she teased, brushing an invisible thread from her dress. Not particularly, Elliot said, too sharply. Claire tilted her head. He's an old friend. Elliot. Noah and I went to college together. He's in town for a startup project. Elliot raised an eyebrow. And what exactly does his project need from you? She blinked. Nothing. It's just dinner and a dance. You know, normal things people do. People in your position don't usually mix business with nostalgia, he said quietly. Claire's jaw tightened. I wasn't aware my social life needed your approval. That stung, more than it should have. Elliot turned away, focusing on a spot just past her shoulder, where donors mingled near the silent auction. Claire sighed. Don't do that. Do what's shut down, like you always do when something bothers you. Say what you mean. Elliot. For once. He looked at her then. Really looked, and what he saw made something twist in his chest. I don't like him, he said simply. Claire folded her arms. You don't know him. I don't need to. He wants something. Everyone wants something, she replied, softer now. They stood in silence for a beat too long, until the quartet began another song. Claire took a small step back. I should get back to the donors, she said. And you should try smiling. It's a party. As she walked away, Elliot found himself watching the sway of her steps. The way her hand brushed her hip absent-mindedly, a gesture he'd seen 1,000 times, but never noticed until now. Across the room, Noah lifted his glass to Elliot in a half-toast, that insufferable grin still plastered on his face. Elliot downed the rest of his bourbon and turned away. Something was changing. He didn't like it. Not because he feared change, but because, for the first time in years, he had something to lose, and he had no idea how to keep it. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was silent. Elliot Hawthorne stood at the back, hands clasped behind his back, watching the floors tick upward. Beside him, Claire Monroe was scrolling through her tablet, face composed, voice absent. The distance between them felt wider than the whole tower. They had arrived at the office early the next morning, both on time, both professional, both pretending nothing had happened the night before. The truth was, Elliot hadn't slept. He'd gone home after the gala, poured himself another drink, and stared at the city skyline until dawn edged the buildings with pale light. He'd thought of Claire's laugh, of her hand in someone else's, of how his own chest had tightened in a way that had nothing to do with age. Good morning, Mr. Hawthorne, the receptionist greeted as they stepped into the lobby. Morning. Grace. He nodded, walking briskly toward his office. Claire followed, heels soft against the polished floor. She didn't speak until they were behind the safety of his closed door. Your first call is with Tokyo at 9:15. I've reviewed the latest figures from the Yamamoto merger, nothing unexpected. The numbers still hold. Elliot nodded, sinking into the leather chair behind his desk. Thank you. Claire stood there for a second too long. Anything else, he asked. She hesitated. You're not going to talk about last night. There's nothing to talk about. Her expression shifted. Not surprised. Disappointed. You acted like I betrayed you, she said, her voice calm. Like my dancing with a friend somehow crossed a line I didn't know existed. Elliot didn't look up. It was a distraction. That's all. To you? Maybe, she replied. To me, it was 10 minutes of being a person instead of a machine. That landed like a stone in his chest. He opened his mouth to reply, but she was already gone. The office felt quieter than usual after that. He busied himself with reports, contracts, decisions tasks that used to bring comfort in their predictability. But now his concentration scattered like dust in sunlight. Mid-morning, he found himself rereading a simple memo 3 times. Claire was right. He had acted like she owed him something, and that wasn't fair. But feelings weren't fair, were they? By noon, he gave up the pretense of productivity and walked down the hall to the executive lounge. From there, he could see the city stretch for miles, neat blocks of life and chaos. Somewhere out there, Claire was moving through her day, calm and composed, as if nothing had shifted. But something had. He remembered their first interview 3 years ago. She'd worn a navy suit, no makeup, hair in a bun. She'd looked him in the eye and said, "I'm not here to be your secretary. I'm here to make your world work so you can do what you do best." She hadn't lied. Since that day, Claire Monroe had become the only person Elliot trusted without question. She ran his calendar, defended his reputation, protected his sanity. She knew when he needed space and when he needed someone to say, "You're wrong." She was sharp, perceptive, and loyal to a fault. And last night, he'd nearly ruined that. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, his head of investments. "Need 5 mins. Call when free." "It's about Green." Elliot frowned and dialed. Marcus answered immediately. "Morning. You remember Noah Green?" Elliot's stomach tightened. Unfortunately, something's off. He approached us about a joint venture, cybersecurity software. Looks solid on the surface, but some of the backing firms are murky. How murky? Shell companies. Overlaps with competitors. The kind of thing that smells like a setup. Elliot's voice turned cold. "Is Claire involved?" Marcus hesitated. He used her name. Said she recommended us as a stable partner. That's not unusual. But "I figured you'd want to know. Send me everything," Elliot said, then hung up. His thoughts spiraled. Noah Green wasn't just a charming distraction. He had an angle. And now, Claire, whether knowingly or not, was a part of it. Elliot pressed his fingertips to his temples, the beginnings of a headache blooming. He trusted Claire. He had to. But trust, once shaken, didn't settle easily. That afternoon, when Claire returned to deliver the updated investor projections, he watched her more closely than before, noticing details. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when nervous. The way she avoided his gaze. "Can I ask you something?" he said, just as she turned to leave. She paused. "Of course. Noah Green. When did you last see him before yesterday?" Claire raised an eyebrow. "Before last night. Not since college." "Why?" He hesitated. "Did he tell you anything about his business?" "A little. He said he's working on a data analytics startup." "Why did he ask you anything specific about us? About the merger?" Claire's eyes narrowed. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything," Elliot said. "I'm asking." "Well, maybe you should decide which one you're doing," she replied, voice tight. The room went still. Elliot leaned back. I'm just trying to understand his intentions. Claire crossed her arms. Maybe you should just ask him. And with that, she left again. This time, Elliot didn't stop her. Because the truth was, he didn't trust Noah Green. But what terrified him more was how much he wanted to trust Claire, and how much it would break him if she gave him reason not to. Tuesday morning arrived with overcast skies, casting a dull silver hue over the city, the kind of light that made everything look colder than it was. Elliot Hawthorne sat at his desk, blazer draped neatly on the back of his chair, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His office was quiet, too quiet. Claire Monroe hadn't said more than 10 words to him since yesterday. The silence wasn't hostile, but it wasn't peaceful either. It was the kind of quiet that carried weight, the kind you had to walk around carefully, afraid of stepping on something that might crack. Elliot leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The financials were clean. The projections were strong. The Yamamoto merger was expected to increase market share by 18%. By all metrics, he should have been satisfied. Instead, he kept thinking about Claire's face when he asked about Noah. The flicker of hurt, the way she squared her shoulders and shut the door on her way out. Not angry, but tired. He recognized that kind of tired. It was the kind of fatigue that came from being questioned when all you'd ever given was your best. He didn't like the way it made him feel. At 10 sharp, Claire knocked lightly on the glass wall of his office. She was holding 2 coffees, his usual black, hers with almond milk and 1 sugar. She set his cup down without a word, then took the seat across from him. "We need to talk," she said. Not a question, a statement. Elliot nodded, agreed. Claire folded her hands on her lap. "I want to clear something up. About Noah." Elliot stayed quiet, letting her speak. "Yes, we dated. Briefly. Back in college. It didn't end dramatically. Just life pulling in different directions." She met his gaze. "He messaged me on LinkedIn about a month ago. Said he was coming back to Boston. That he remembered me." Her voice didn't waver, but her fingers twisted slightly in her lap. "I thought it was harmless. A coffee, a few dinners. I didn't think I needed to report it like some employee conduct policy violation." "I didn't say you did," Elliot said, "but you acted like I had." She replied, "And that's the problem." Silence. Elliot looked down at his coffee. "You've always been more than just an employee to me." Claire blinked. "Then why do I feel like I'm constantly being evaluated?" That hit deeper than he expected. She continued, "You want trust, Elliot, but you don't offer it. You want loyalty, but you keep people at arm's length. You expect perfection, but won't give grace." "I don't expect perfection." "You do," she interrupted. "You expect it from yourself, so you expect it from everyone else." Elliot exhaled slowly, staring out the window. "I've spent my whole life depending on numbers," he said after a moment. "Balance sheets, trends, facts. They don't lie. People do." "That's fair," Claire said softly. "But at some point, you have to decide who's worth trusting anyway, even if they could hurt you." She stood. "I've never lied to you. And I'm not going to start now. But I won't keep justifying my friendships because of your insecurities." As she reached the door, Elliot called out, "Claire." She paused, hand on the knob. He stood slowly, walking around the desk, unsure why it felt like crossing a canyon. "I'm not jealous of him because he's your friend," Elliot said. "I'm jealous because he gets a part of you I've never seen." Claire turned. "That's your choice, not mine." And then she left again. The rest of the day passed in a strange rhythm. Elliot couldn't focus on contracts. He tried reading market forecasts but kept losing his place. Numbers blurred. Words lost meaning. He found himself wandering into the conference room that evening, where the janitorial staff had just finished. The city lights flickered outside. He stood at the window and remembered the first time Claire had smiled at one of his sarcastic remarks. The way she could navigate a 12-hour workday and still bring him tea at the end without being asked. He remembered something she said once, early on, after dealing with a particularly hostile client. "Some people don't need fixing, Elliot. They need seeing." At the time, he hadn't understood what she meant. Now, he did. At 7:46 p.m., his phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. "Sent you the background check on Green. There's more. You're going to want to see this." Elliot opened the email and skimmed quickly. His jaw tensed. Noah Green had ties to a private equity firm currently under investigation for corporate espionage. 3 previous companies had accused him, nothing proven, but enough smoke to suggest fire. And now, he was sniffing around Claire. Around his company. Elliot didn't know if Claire had been used, or worse, if she knew more than she said. Either way, the only thing he was certain of was this: something wasn't right. And trust. Trust was suddenly a currency in short supply. The lights in Elliot Hawthorne's apartment flickered on with a soft click. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the Boston skyline stretched across the night like a glittering map. But he barely noticed it anymore. The city had long ago become just a backdrop to his thoughts, noise behind the silence. He poured himself a drink. Bourbon again. No ice. His days used to end with a sense of closure, projects completed, deals signed. Now they ended with unfinished thoughts. Questions left hanging in the quiet. Claire hadn't spoken to him since yesterday's conversation. She'd passed his office a dozen times, checking in with others, coordinating schedules, taking calls. But not him. Not once. He deserved that. He knew he did. Elliot sank into the worn leather armchair by the window, staring into the amber liquid in his glass. For the first time in years, he realized he didn't know what she was thinking. He didn't know if she still trusted him. Worse, he didn't know if he still trusted her. And yet, he missed her voice. Missed the way she smoothed chaos with calm. The way she brought warmth into sterile rooms. The way she just fit into every piece of his world without demanding space. Now, her absence echoed. He picked up his phone and opened the background file Marcus had sent. He'd read it 3 times already, but some part of him hoped the 4th would change something. Noah Green had built a career out of connections, old friends, former classmates, business ties. He never stayed long in one company, always left before questions could be asked, always moved just before lawsuits surfaced. 3 firms, 3 investigations, 1 pattern, and now he was here. Elliot set the phone down. He hadn't told Claire. He should have told her. Instead, he'd said nothing. Again. Because the idea of looking her in the eye and accusing her of being a pawn or worse. A traitor made something in his chest curl in shame. She deserved more than suspicion. But silence. Silence was easier than truth. The next morning, the air was crisp, the kind that hinted at a coming winter. Elliot arrived at the office early, hoping to catch Claire before the day swallowed them both. She was already there, sitting at her desk, hair pinned back, fingers flying across her keyboard. A small cup of oatmeal sat beside her coffee, steam curling into the air. She looked focused, collected, distant. He stood in the doorway for a moment before she noticed him. "Morning," she said, without looking up. "Morning," he replied. "May I?" She nodded toward the chair across from her. He sat. Let the silence stretch a moment longer than necessary. "There's something you should know," he began. Her fingers paused. "About Noah." Claire's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. "What about him?" Elliot chose his words carefully. "He's been involved in questionable business practices. The firms he's tied to there are investigations, possible data leaks, espionage." Claire's hands lowered to her lap. "You think I'm involved?" she said, flatly. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." Elliot leaned forward. "I don't think you'd ever knowingly put the company at risk. But I think he may be using your connection to gain access." Claire's eyes were steady. "And you've known this since, when a few days." Her lips pressed into a line. "And you're telling me now because I wasn't sure how to say it." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "You, the man who can give a keynote speech without blinking, suddenly can't find words. It's different," he said quietly. "You're different." For a second, something flickered in her eyes. Then it was gone. "Elliot," she said, standing, "I've never lied to you. I've never compromised your trust. But right now, I'm wondering if the reverse is true." That hit harder than he expected. She picked up a folder and turned away. "We have a board meeting at 2. Try to be ready." The door clicked softly behind her. That afternoon, Elliot sat at the head of the conference table, listening but not really hearing. The board discussed projections, partnerships, legal exposure. Every word bounced off the walls of his mind like pebbles on glass. Across the room, Claire stood beside the head of legal, presenting updates. She was sharp, efficient, unshakable. But she didn't look at him once. After the meeting, Elliot walked back to his office alone. The hallway felt longer than usual. As he passed the break room, he caught a glimpse of Claire talking to Marcus. They weren't arguing, but the conversation looked serious. Marcus held a manila folder. Claire's brow was furrowed. Elliot kept walking. He didn't ask. He didn't interrupt. And that he realized was the cost of silence. Every time he chose not to speak, not to ask, not to trust, he gave up a piece of whatever was left between them. And soon, there might be nothing left at all. The rain began sometime after midnight, tapping softly against the high windows of Elliot Hawthorne's penthouse. He had been sitting in the dark for hours, the only light coming from the dim glow of the fireplace across the room. The warmth did little to thaw the ache in his chest. He should have told her everything. About Noah. About the file Marcus uncovered. About the board members quietly questioning her influence. But every time the words had reached his lips, they collapsed under the weight of doubt. Not in her, but in himself. Elliot had built his life on control, precision, timing. You don't confess things unless you know the outcome. But Claire Monroe didn't operate by blueprints. She wasn't an algorithm to be solved. She was something messier, warmer, and because of that, infinitely more dangerous to a man like him. That morning, he arrived at the office earlier than usual. Claire was already there. Not surprising. She was standing by the window in her corner of the suite, her tablet in hand, brow furrowed. Rain streaked the glass behind her, and in the gray light, she looked impossibly distant, like someone he'd dreamed once but could never touch. "Morning," Elliot offered, quietly. She turned, surprised. "You're early." He nodded. "Didn't sleep." "Me either," she said, setting the tablet down. "Too much noise in my head." Elliot gave a half smile. "Same." They stood in that space, not arguing, but not at peace until Claire finally broke the silence. "I think Noah's playing me," she said. Elliot's breath caught. She crossed her arms. "He's been asking subtle questions about our security systems, about where we keep client data. At first, it felt like curiosity. Now, it feels rehearsed." Elliot stepped closer. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "Because I didn't want to believe it," she said simply. "Because I thought maybe, for once, someone saw me and not just what I could offer." He looked at her then. Really looked. "I've always seen you." "Claire," he said. Her eyes softened, but only slightly. "Then why didn't you say anything?" And there it was, the moment to tell her. The moment to confess about the scholarship fund, about her brother, about how, for 3 years, he had quietly funded Miguel's education without her knowing. Because he wanted to help. Because he couldn't watch her stretch herself thin to care for everyone but herself. But the words didn't come. Because if he told her now, it might sound like manipulation, like leverage, like a confession made to win something back instead of to give. So instead, he said, "Because I didn't think it would change anything." Claire's face went still. "It would have changed everything," she said quietly. Then she picked up her coffee and walked out. Later that day, Elliot found himself in the legal department, sitting across from Thomas Blake, their general counsel. The walls were lined with framed degrees and muted lighting, sterile and safe. "What's the worst-case scenario if this Noah situation blows up?" Elliot asked, straight to the point. Blake leaned back. "If he's caught accessing proprietary data through an insider, even accidentally, we could be open to breach of confidentiality. Investor trust would drop. Stock price might take a hit. Depends on the optics." And Claire Elliott's voice was low. "If she's tied to him, even indirectly, she'll be questioned. Legally, she might be clean. But reputation, that's another story." Elliot nodded slowly. "I want a copy of every file she's accessed in the last 3 months," he said. Blake raised an eyebrow. "You think she's involved? I think she might have been used." Elliot said, "And I want to be the one to prove she wasn't." That night, the rain returned. Elliot stayed late in the office, scanning security logs, reviewing employee access histories. At 9:17 p.m., he found what he was looking for, an IP address flagged by IT 2 weeks ago. It had accessed encrypted client lists from an external location. The access credentials, Claire Monroe's. His heart dropped. But something didn't make sense. She never worked off-site. She was too careful. He dug deeper. The log showed the breach happened during a charity event, an event where Claire had been by his side all evening. He leaned back, closing his eyes. Someone had cloned her credentials. Noah. It had to be him. But proving it would take time. And tomorrow, the board would want answers. The next morning, Claire arrived with her usual calm expression, but there was a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. She handed Elliot a folder. "What's this?" he asked. "Everything I could dig up on Noah, connections, shell companies, ties to firms in litigation. I called in a few favors." Elliot flipped through the papers. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from guilt. She'd been working to protect the company, even as he doubted her. "Claire," he started, but she stopped him with a look. "Don't," she said. "Not unless you're going to be completely honest." And once again, he wasn't. So she turned and walked away again. And Elliot sat there, the weight of 3 years pressing on his chest. He had almost told her. Almost. But almost was never enough. It was Thursday when everything cracked. The morning began with a cold sun and the sting of a late October wind. Elliot Hawthorne arrived at the office just after 6. He didn't bother with coffee. His hands were already too unsteady. The board meeting was scheduled for the next day. Rumors had begun to swirl, investors whispering, internal emails flying, suspicions thickening like fog, the leak, the credentials, the timing. Everything was pointing toward one conclusion. And Elliot couldn't stop it from spiraling. But worst of all, he still hadn't told Claire. The scholarship money. Miguel. All of it. Because deep down, he feared that once she knew, the last sliver of trust between them would vanish. At 7:15, Claire stepped into his office. She wore her hair down, something she only did when she was too exhausted to pretend. Her eyes were sharp, but beneath the surface, he saw the fraying edges of someone holding too much together. "You wanted to see me?" she asked. Elliot gestured to the chair across from him. "Close the door, please." She did, then sat legs crossed, back straight, hands folded in her lap, defensive, controlled. "I have reason to believe Noah cloned your login credentials." Elliot began. "The data breach your ID was used, but the timestamp doesn't line up with your location." Claire didn't flinch. "I figured as much." He blinked. "You did." She nodded. "I spoke with Marcus last night. He shared the logs with me. And you didn't come to me." Claire gave a dry laugh. "Why would I? You clearly already made up your mind." "That's not true." "It is." She cut in. "You think I don't see it? The way you've been watching me, double-checking everything I touch. You're afraid I'm the weak link." "I'm trying to protect you," Elliot said. "No, you're trying to protect yourself from being wrong about me." The words landed like a slap. Elliot leaned forward. "Claire, I need you to understand." "No," she interrupted, voice trembling now. "You need to understand. For 3 years, I've given you everything, my time, my loyalty, my trust, and you gave me suspicion in return. I gave you opportunity," Elliot said, too sharply. "I paid for your brother's tuition." The room froze. Claire's eyes widened. "You what?" Elliot's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't meant to say it. Not like this. Not as a weapon. But it was out now. I set up the scholarship," he said, softer now. "For Miguel. Quietly. I didn't want you to feel obligated." Claire stood up slowly, like someone finding their balance after a punch. "You paid for his education," she repeated, each word like a shard of glass, "and didn't tell me. I didn't want credit. I just—" He stood too, reaching toward her. "I saw you working late, skipping meals, sending money home, so you decided to fix it." Her voice rose, thick with disbelief. "Without even asking if I wanted your help. It wasn't about control. It was about care." "No, Elliot," she said, voice breaking. "Care is asking someone what they need, not deciding it for them." She backed away toward the door, shaking her head. "You used your money to make decisions about my life, about my family. You think you did it out of love, but what you really did was strip away my agency. I never meant—" "Of course you didn't," she said, "but that doesn't make it right." For the first time in years, Elliot felt small, not because he had failed, but because he had tried and still caused pain. Claire opened the door. "I can't do this anymore," she said. "Not like this." Then she was gone. That afternoon, Elliot sat alone in his office. The city pulsed outside, but it felt distant, muffled, like the sound of a party through thick walls. He stared at the folder Claire had dropped on his desk before she left. Inside were Noah's files emails, transaction histories, connections to the firm under investigation. It was everything they needed to clear her name, everything that would save the company. But it couldn't save them. Not anymore. He picked up the phone to call Thomas Blake. "I'm going to need a resignation package drafted," Elliot said quietly, "contingent on tomorrow's board vote." Blake didn't ask why. Neither of them had to. That evening, Claire didn't go home right away. She found herself sitting in her car outside the office, staring at the building's glowing windows. She remembered the first week working with Elliot, how cold he had seemed, how careful. But beneath it, she had sensed something else. Something wounded. Something she thought she could reach. She thought she had. But trust wasn't something you could build alone. It took two, and somewhere along the way, Elliot had stopped meeting her halfway. Now, she didn't know where they stood, only that it hurt, more than she ever expected. The office had never felt this quiet. Elliot Hawthorne stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows in his private suite, watching the Boston skyline fade into early evening shadows. The city moved below, as always, cars inching forward, people wrapped in coats, lives continuing as if nothing had shifted. But everything had shifted. Claire Monroe hadn't come in that morning. Her desk was exactly as she'd left it the night before. A ceramic cup still held the last sips of her cold coffee. Her tablet sat neatly beside a yellow legal pad filled with her careful handwriting. Organized, thoughtful, just like her. He hadn't realized how much of the rhythm of his day was tethered to her presence until it stopped. No light knock at the door. No calm voice reminding him of meetings. No small, unnoticed kindnesses that had once seemed part of the architecture of the place. He reached for the folder she'd dropped the day before and opened it again. Inside were the receipts of betrayal, but not hers. She had tracked Noah's connections to a web of companies under federal review. Offshore accounts, insider tips, leaked proposals. It was meticulous work she had done, while doubting whether the man she trusted most still believed in her. Elliot sat down and stared at the evidence. Noah hadn't just tried to compromise the company. He had compromised Elliot's faith in himself. And that was the deeper cut. For most of his adult life, Elliot had relied on logic, on numbers, on detachment. He'd learned early that people, especially the ones you let close, could become unpredictable, emotional, messy. His marriage had been the first lesson. His ex-wife, Lillian, had once accused him of loving her the way one might admire a painting, appreciative, distant, untouched. You don't feel, Elliot, she had said once, you observe. At the time, he'd dismissed it. But now he understood. He had observed Claire Monroe for 3 years, watched her brilliance, her loyalty, her silent strength. But he'd not felt with her, not when it counted. He had tried to fix things with money, with control. He had confused love with protection. And in the process, he had made her feel small when all he wanted was to make her feel safe. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. The board has the full report. We're clean. Green's ties are confirmed. Blake says we're clear legally, but optics still bad. Another message followed. They're moving the vote to tomorrow morning. Early. 8. Elliot exhaled. So it would be tomorrow. The end, or the beginning of something else. Something unknown. He closed his laptop and walked over to Claire's desk. He didn't sit in her chair somehow. That felt too personal. Instead, he ran his fingers gently along the edge of her notepad. One sentence stood out at the top of the page. Strength doesn't mean never breaking. It means rebuilding after the fall. He recognized her handwriting, but not the quote. It sounded like something she had written herself, and it hit harder than anything else that day. That night, Elliot returned home to a quiet apartment, but it didn't feel empty. It felt haunted. Every corner echoed with things unsaid. He poured himself a drink, then stopped halfway. Instead, he sat down and opened the top drawer of the sideboard where he kept old letters, photos, and files he rarely touched. There, in a sealed envelope, was the thank you note Miguel had sent 2 years ago. Addressed to the Board of Trustees, he'd written whoever made this scholarship possible. Thank you. I don't know who you are, but your gift changed my family's life. I won't waste it. Elliot had never shown Claire the letter. It felt like trespassing on a gratitude that didn't belong to him. But now he understood what real giving looked like, and how much he'd missed by hiding in the shadows of secrecy. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he wrote. For the first time in years, he wrote not a speech, not a strategy memo, but a letter, longhand, ink on paper, no edits, no rehearsals. He wrote to Claire. He told her everything. About Miguel. About the first time he noticed her staying late without saying a word. About the day he overheard her on the phone with her mother. Trying to reassure her family everything was fine when it wasn't. He wrote about the reasons he helped, and the bigger truth, why he never told her. Not because he was ashamed, but because he was afraid. Afraid that if she knew, she'd see him not as generous, but as arrogant, not as someone who cared, but someone who needed to be needed. He signed the letter with his full name, and then beneath it, something he had never written before in ink. I'm sorry, Claire, and I love you. He sealed it in an envelope, addressed it to her personally, and left it on her desk. No matter what happened the next day, she would have the truth. Finally. The boardroom on the 43rd floor had always felt like a stage. Long mahogany table, 12 leather chairs, one panoramic view of the city designed to impress. But this morning, it felt more like a courtroom. Elliot Hawthorne stood at the head of the table. His suit was pressed, his tie straight, but there was a stillness in his posture that hadn't been there before. Not weakness resolve. Around him sat 11 board members, each with their own histories, ambitions, alliances. Some had been with him from the beginning. Others, brought in more recently by investors hungry for change. At the far end of the table sat Harrison Klein, the quiet force behind the recent murmurs of dissatisfaction. Klein had money, clout, and a dangerous talent for subtle manipulation, and he wanted Elliot out. Elliot cleared his throat. Before we begin the vote, he said, "I have a few things to say." No one objected. He reached into his briefcase and laid out 3 documents, a copy of the Noah Green investigation, Claire's compiled research, and the original IT security report confirming the login breach. "These are records of what actually happened," Elliot said calmly. "We were compromised. Yes, but not from the inside. Claire Monroe is not responsible for the breach. She is, in fact, the reason we discovered it in time." A few members exchanged glances. She put this company above her own reputation. Elliot continued, "While some of us were questioning her loyalty, she was protecting ours." Harrison Klein leaned forward. "That may be true, but it doesn't erase the public fallout. The press already has the story. Shareholder confidence is slipping. Sometimes leadership means stepping aside for the good of the company." Elliot nodded slowly. "You're right, Klein. Leadership is about responsibility." He paused. "And that's why I need to tell you something else." He picked up the final folder, the one with the scholarship records. "For the past 3 years, I've diverted discretionary funds not for personal gain, not for marketing, but to quietly support underprivileged students through a scholarship program." Klein frowned. "Without board approval?" "Yes," Elliot admitted. "Because I didn't want applause. I didn't want headlines. I just wanted to do the right thing." Murmurs spread through the room. "One of those students," Elliot continued, "was Miguel Monroe, Claire's brother." Now the room went still. "I never told her. Never told anyone. Because it wasn't about her. It was about what we stand for." Klein shook his head. "This is exactly the kind of reckless decision-making we're trying to avoid." "Is it reckless?" Elliot asked, voice rising. "To invest in people. To believe that our profits mean nothing if they don't serve a greater purpose." He looked each of them in the eye. "You can vote me out today. You probably will. But before you do, ask yourselves this. What kind of company do you want to be? One that hides behind policies? Or one that dares to care? Silence." Then, from the back of the room, a voice cut in. "I think I have something to add." All heads turned. Claire Monroe stood in the doorway, a sealed envelope in her hand. Elliot's breath caught. She stepped forward, calm but unshakable. "This is a sworn affidavit from a cybersecurity expert," she said, placing it on the table. "It confirms that the login breach was initiated through an external IP, using a cloned device. The breach was traced directly to Noah Green, acting on behalf of Klein Partners, a consulting firm with a known interest in our merger data." The room shifted. Suddenly, everyone was looking at Klein. Claire continued, Mr. Klein, your firm stands to benefit from destabilizing Sterling Industries before the merger. You use Green to undermine our internal trust, and you tried to paint Elliott as a liability so you could install a new CEO more favorable to your deals. Klein opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Thomas Blake, seated to the right, leaned forward. We'll verify this, but if it holds, you're the one who's compromised the board's integrity. Klein pushed his chair back, face tight. I'll be speaking with legal. And then he left the room. Silence followed. Elliot turned to Claire. How did you know I've known since yesterday? She said. But I wanted you to stand up for yourself first. He blinked. Why? Because I needed to know you still believed in something, she replied, even if it meant losing everything. Elliot nodded. Words failed him. The chairwoman of the board, an older woman named Janice Mallory, cleared her throat. I move we cancel the vote, she said. Until further investigation clears up this situation? No one objected. Elliot exhaled. Not victory, but a stay of execution. And somehow, that felt like more. Later that day, Elliot found Claire by the elevator. She stood with her arms crossed, the sealed envelope now gone, her face unreadable. I didn't expect you to show up, he said. I almost didn't, she replied. But then I remembered. You left something on my desk. Elliot hesitated. Did you read it? She nodded. Twice. And Claire looked at him. Really looked. You still don't know how to say things the easy way. Do you know? He said softly. But I meant every word. I know, she replied. And then, just before the elevator opened, she added, That's why I came back. Claire Monroe didn't go straight home after the board meeting. Instead, she found herself back at her apartment, sitting on the edge of the sofa with Elliot's letter still clutched in her hand. She hadn't let go of it since she left the building. She'd read it twice already, but she couldn't bring herself to put it down. It wasn't a long letter, not by Elliot's standards. He was a man of efficiency, always had been. But this letter? This was something else. There were crossed out words, scribbled edits in the margins. A water ring at the bottom corner, as if a glass had been set there and forgotten. It wasn't perfect, and that made it real. She opened it again. Claire, if you're reading this, then I've finally done something right. I've said the thing I should have said long ago. I saw you, Claire, from the very first day, not as an assistant, not as a name on a resume, but as a force of nature wrapped in quiet strength. You didn't demand space, you earned it. You didn't just manage my life, you held it together in ways I didn't even understand until you weren't there. What I did for Miguel, I did because I couldn't bear to watch you carry so much on your own. It was never about control. It was gratitude, admiration, and yes, love. I didn't say it because I thought it would ruin everything. Now I know that not saying it did that anyway. If this is the end of our story, I want you to know this. You made me better in every way that mattered. Elliot Claire let the pages rest in her lap. The apartment was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the wall clock. She stared out the window, Boston's evening lights twinkling beyond the glass. Somewhere out there, Elliot was probably back at his own apartment, alone, nursing the same ache in his chest. She remembered their early days working together, the silence, the long hours, the slow building of trust. He wasn't easy, but he was steady, reliable, and in his own way, kind. He had noticed things others didn't, like how she never asked for time off, even when her mother was in the hospital, or how she never took coffee breaks, but always made sure his was hot and ready before meetings. Elliot had helped quietly, clumsily, but with heart, and now, after everything, he had given her the one thing she never expected from him: his truth. Claire stood up and walked to her bookshelf. From between two novels, she pulled out a leather-bound journal. She hadn't written in it for months, but tonight, her fingers found a pen without hesitation. She began to write, not to him, not yet, to herself. You were right to walk away. But maybe you're strong enough to walk back, too. Across town, Elliot sat in his armchair with a single lamp on, casting a pool of light over the file he'd laid across his lap. It wasn't a contract or a forecast. It was a copy of every scholarship application from the past 3 years. 63 students, 63 names, 63 futures that now had a chance. He read through them one by one, stopping at Miguel's. There it was, handwritten, slightly crooked, heartfelt. My sister is my hero. I don't know how she does everything she does. She never asks for help. But I hope this scholarship helps her too. I hope she sleeps more, laughs more, lives. Elliot closed the folder and leaned back, his throat tight. It wasn't about money. It had never been. It was about trying to carry the weight for someone else and not realizing that what they really needed wasn't saving. It was partnership. He looked around the apartment, pristine, organized, cold. He imagined Claire's voice in this space, teasing him about the lack of color. He imagined her laughter echoing off the high ceilings. He imagined her, here. And for the first time, he didn't just miss her. He wanted to fight for her. The next morning, Claire was already at her desk when Elliot arrived. She looked up briefly, then back down at her laptop. But he noticed something in the letter, folded neatly beside her keyboard. He stood in his office doorway for a long moment before walking over. I didn't think you'd come back, he said. Claire shrugged, her fingers still typing. I had unfinished business. Elliot nodded. Do we? She finally looked at him. Her eyes were tired, but not closed off. Yes, she said, but not the kind you solve in a boardroom. He smiled faintly. No, definitely not. There was a pause. Then I meant every word. He said quietly. I know, she replied. Elliot cleared his throat. Would you, maybe after work? Claire raised an eyebrow. Are you asking me to dinner? Mr. Hawthorne. He chuckled softly. Yes, but only if you call me Elliot. She gave him a look he couldn't quite read, half amusement, half affection. Then yes, Elliot, I will. And just like that, the walls between them began to crack, not with explosions or declarations, but with quiet honesty. With the kind of truth that never needed shouting to be heard. The ballroom hadn't changed. Same high ceilings, same gilded chandeliers, same soft hum of jazz spilling from the quartet tucked into the corner. And yet, to Elliot Hawthorne, everything felt different. It had been 2 years since that night, the night of the breach, the confrontation, the unraveling, and the start of something better. Now, he stood near the bar, watching the crowd with the practiced calm of a man who no longer needed to impress anyone. His tie was loosened slightly. A touch of gray had begun to streak his temples. But the tension that once clung to him like a second skin was gone. Across the room, Claire Monroe laughed at something one of the young interns said. She wore a dark green dress, elegant, understated, and her hair was pinned up, a few strands framing her face. She hadn't seen him yet. Elliot took a sip of his bourbon, then placed the glass down. He crossed the room slowly, weaving through donors, executives, familiar faces who now greeted him with warmth instead of distance. As he approached, Claire turned. Their eyes met. There was no surprise, no drama, just a smile. The kind that said, "I've been waiting." "You're late," she said, voice light. "You're early," he replied. She tilted her head. "I live 5 blocks away." He chuckled. "And here I was, thinking you showed up early to steal my thunder." Claire stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You gave that up the day you let a junior analyst take the keynote." "Don't remind me," he murmured. "I'm still recovering." They stood there for a moment, the noise of the room fading around them. "You look good," Claire said, not teasing this time. "So do you." Silence stretched between them, but not an awkward one. Just full, comfortable, shared. Claire broke it first. "Did you see the new scholarship list?" Elliot nodded. 34 this year. "Your legacy is growing," she said softly. He glanced at her. "I thought we agreed not to call it that." She smiled. "Fine. Our quiet rebellion against the system." They both laughed. After a beat, Elliot asked, and Miguel Claire lit up. "Graduated in May. Working at a nonprofit now, teaching financial literacy in underfunded schools." Elliot blinked. "That's perfect." He thinks so too. They lapsed into silence again. But this time it was more than comfortable. It was full of memory, regret, grace, growth. Claire reached into her clutch and pulled out a small envelope. "No letter this time," she said. "Just an invitation." He raised an eyebrow. "To a dinner, Saturday. My place. Just us." Elliot took the envelope, brushing her fingers briefly. "I'd like that." "I know," she said with a wink. Later that evening, Elliot found himself alone on the balcony outside. The city glittered beneath the stars. The wind was soft, carrying the scent of early spring. He looked out over Boston, remembering the man he had been, cold, precise, guarded, and the man he was now, still precise, still guarded, but softened, warmer, open. The cost of transformation had been high, but the return priceless. Footsteps sounded behind him. Claire joined him, her hand slipping into his with ease. They stood in silence, the kind only people who had truly seen each other could share. "It's funny," she said after a while. "You used to hate these events." "I still do," he replied. "But I like who I get to come with now." She leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. And for the first time in a very long time, Elliot didn't feel like he had something to prove. He had something to hold. At its heart, this story isn't about wealth or betrayal. It's about the quiet cost of unspoken love and the power of honest connection. Elliot Hawthorne had everything: success, control, status, but he lost the one thing that truly mattered because he couldn't say 3 simple words, "I need you." For many of us, especially with age, We've learned how to protect ourselves with silence. We've chosen pride over vulnerability, believing that love shown through actions is enough. But sometimes, what the people we care for need most is to hear it. This story reminds us that it's never too late to speak what's in your heart. That dignity doesn't come from holding back, but from reaching out. And that healing, true healing, comes when we allow others to truly see us. So if there's someone you've been meaning to call, something you've been carrying for too long, say it. Before time turns it into the letter never sent. Because sometimes, the greatest gift we can give is our truth. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it touched something in your heart, if you saw a part of yourself in Elliot or in Claire, please help us share it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every click helps us bring more heartfelt stories to life.